Hey, welcome to the X Podcast. My name is Russ Moore. I'm sitting here across from Tim Moore.
Yo.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
What?
You're all business today.
Why?
That's
unofficial?
You just seem all business. You weren't grinning this time.
Well, I was trying. In my head, I literally thought before, okay, he's going to do a newish intro. I'm just going to roll with it and not think about it. So,
Yep.
it was good. Very good.
Very good. You can see it or may not see it if you're on YouTube. We're
can't.
surrounded by streamers. We are preparing for our
Streamers?
annual, banners, decor.
Yeah.
Decor. Okay.
Oh,
Mr.
streamers.
Technical.
When I think of streamers, I think.
Things are streaming from the ceiling.
There you go. I don't think they can see it.
Annual Women's Conference, Inspired, shout out.
Yep.
Hundreds of women will be here this Saturday.
Yeah.
And we are continuing our mental health campaign on Sundays.
Yeah.
And this past Sunday was week 2, Prison of Escape. What's your escape? And
What is your escape?
it was really powerful. And we had promised last week that we were going to kind of piggyback off that and talk a little bit of mental health this week. And then you ended up sending an article that was very timely
Yeah.
to our conversation. And it was basically an article or an announcement from the U.S. Surgeon
Can we
General.
say it was a Surgeon General warning?
General warning.
Every time I hear a Surgeon General warning, all I can think about is smoking.
I know. This was not on the back of a pack of camels. This was on the back of the pack of human hearts. And so...
This was not on the back of camels.
Camel cigarettes.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
Yeah. The new Surgeon General warning.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us what it says?
Well, basically, the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Does that sound right?
I'm
Vivek
hoping
Murthy?
so.
I don't know. Vivek Murthy. I'm trying to. I don't know if I got it. But he was basically addressing what is kind of the new epidemic in our culture today that affects mental health, and it's loneliness.
Yeah.
I actually was a little bit shocked because every time you think about something getting released from the Surgeon General, I always think it's something medical related. It's something, food and medical or something related. And then to hear him talk about something like loneliness, I thought that was kind of fascinating. And the language, it says they released an advisory. This was actually Tuesday of this week that we're releasing this podcast.
Which sounds urgent.
Yeah. Addressing the epidemic of loneliness and isolation affecting the country. And so the whole article, it just seems to be contrasting loneliness and connection.
Yeah.
Isolation and relationships.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because I guess I was not expecting that to come from the Surgeon General. It doesn't seem like a space that they would be in, but I think maybe because it affects health, mental health.
Yeah, it is interesting because, not to get into back into the mud of 2020 and all the controversy of shutdowns and lockdowns and everything else, but, a lot of people that weren't in the classic academic health world, strictly from a physiological stance, they were sounding the alarms of, okay, I know we're worried about this virus, but we already were at an all-time high of anxiety and depression pre-COVID, and they were sounding the alarms of what are the effects going to be 2 years from now of isolation and loneliness and addiction and disconnection. And I think we really are seeing, regardless of what people should have done with the lockdown, we really are seeing from a lot of different factors. I really do think it's not hyperbole to call it an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah.
And I told you, it reminded me of an article I saw, and I went back and looked just to make sure I didn't have it wrong. But sure enough, I believe it was the same Surgeon General, came out and said the new report was that the widespread loneliness in the U.S. has as many health risks as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day.
Whoa!
15 cigarettes a day is the same health risk that we now have.
Is that more than a pack?
Yeah.
Is it pack 12?
Yeah, usually when I smoke
How many
a pack, it's like...
yeah. You know what? I was just going to say some of the symptoms. I was reading this, and maybe that's why. I think that's why the Surgeon General chimed in on it, because it actually has a physical health impact, right? It says research shows that loneliness and isolation are linked to, I don't know how loosely or how concrete this is, as they link an article or the study, but Sleep problems. Are you all right? Probably coughing.
Yep.
Excessive coughing, they said.
yeah.
Okay, maybe not. I made that was
my
one.
Diet Coke went down the wrong way.
Okay. Inflammation and immune changes in younger adults. In older people, they're tied to symptoms such as pain, insomnia, depression, anxiety, and shorter lifespan.
So have you,
They also say for everybody, higher risk of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, addiction, suicidality, and self-harm and dementia. I don't know. Man, they really tied it to everything.
They really did.
I don't know if that's
well, I found this
a little bit of a stretch.
This is I found this other article showing the health risks of loneliness in men. And here's some more encouraging stats. Dementia and cognitive decline. Researchers find that loneliness is associated with a 40% increased risk for dementia. Depression, feeling lonely can raise your stress level and interrupt healthy sleep, making you prone to depression. Heart disease, loneliness is linked to a 30% increase in risk of stroke or coronary heart disease. Impaired immunity, I think you mentioned that. Studies show that lonely people have more inflammation and a decreased antiviral response to people who aren't lonely. Obesity, many people turn to food and slide into unhealthy habits. Earlier here talks about usually there's an increased risk of addiction.
Yeah.
And then premature death. Social isolation increases the risk of premature death from any cause by more than 50%.
Wow. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
But so it reminds me of a movie.
Okay.
Wilson.
Tom Hanks?
Tom Hanks and Wilson. What was the movie?
Castaway.
Okay.
How did I know you were going to say that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably the most epic movie in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Like when I think about loneliness and the impact. I mean, here's a guy who's stranded, marooned on an island, and then a volleyball becomes his best friend.
Yeah.
And you kind of almost see him losing his mind. And so you wonder how much, isolation. I mean, let's also frame these correctly, because loneliness, I would think, would be the sense of feeling alone. Isolation is the act of making yourself alone or isolating yourself from others. So, I mean, I think it's important to note that, loneliness is going to almost be the outcome, or it's going to be what happens when you find yourself alone. Isolation is the act of actually pulling away or, sealing yourself off from other people. And so it's profound.
Yeah.
I guess it proves that at our core, we are social creatures.
Yeah.
In fact, in studying some stuff, as I talked this last week about the brain a little bit and our survival instincts, one of the things that for chemical releases, and I was talking about the basal ganglia and talking about the whole, what the reinforcement and the reward features of that most scientists believe is designed around our survival instinct. And every place I'm reading talking about the basic things that your brain thinks, I need this to survive. As a species, whatever. Procreation was one of them. Food was another one. All of them also listed social connection.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Because, you'd think, what are the basic things you need to survive? Well, you could be marooned on an island as long as you've got steady supply of food and water and you got shelter to keep you out of the elements that could risk the, nature and how it affect your, body and all that stuff, that you can survive. But I mean, maybe physically your body can stay alive, but maybe emotionally and mentally, maybe that's not survival, and maybe you'll end your life sooner. You know what I mean? It was fascinating to me to think about how powerful social connection is in the brain, physiologically in survival. It's like we need it, we crave it.
And even nowadays, pre-caveman or post-caveman, even if you don't necessarily need it for physical survival, it reminds me of a quote by C.S. Lewis. He said, art, like friendship, isn't necessary for survival, but it gives meaning to survive. And so part of what actually gives value for life, part of what actually gives meaning, and part of what actually gives health to our souls is life-giving community. And it actually, even if it's not necessary for survival, it's necessary for flourishing. It's necessary for our hearts and our souls to be healthy. And I think it is really interesting.
I would say this: it's not necessary for survival when you're on top of the food chain.
Yes. Yes.
At an instinctual level, if you're not at the top of the food chain, it's also necessary for survival.
But
all of those
but
things.
It's wired in us. And I mean, it kind of goes back to, me and you've talked a lot about this, about how me and you both nerd out and read what, I love science. You love science even more. But we both nerd out and love to study whether it's philosophy or theology. But I feel like all these years and decades later studying philosophy, I still feel like the anthropology of man can be found in the first 2 chapters of Scripture.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
my favorite. 3. Let's include the 3rd because I think it impacts all, but I agree.
Yes. The first 3 chapters of Scripture,
I totally agree.
And let's go back to one of the first things God told humanity. It's not good for you to be alone. What's that famous literary quote? Was it from a Steinbeck book where it says, a man alone too long does funny things to a man? Or what was it? Do you remember?
No.
But they quote it in Lost. But it is so true. And I do think there's a difference between loneliness and aloneness. Mm-hmm. I think there can be a difference. I heard somebody say recently,
you don't have to be alone to be lonely.
You don't. Mm-mm. You don't. And you can be alone without being lonely. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between solitude and isolation.
Yeah.
But I think I heard one person say the way they define loneliness for them is when they feel unseen. They said for loneliness for them is when they feel unseen and not understood. And I do think aloneness for too long, regardless of how you're wired, can lead to loneliness.
Yeah.
And so loneliness is it's an interesting concept to try to grasp. I heard someone say loneliness can be, and maybe it was in this article, loneliness on a normal human standpoint can just be a normal emotion that triggers you, like hunger. Yeah. Like hunger is not a bad thing. Right. When you get hungry, that's it's your body telling you, I need food. Mm-hmm. You can experience periodic, even consistent at times, moments of loneliness. Be like, oh no, I need to reach out. I need community. But for an emotion to turn sour and unhealthy is when you're stuck in it. So where it's not unhealthy to be hungry, it's unhealthy if you are starving of hunger. And where it's not unhealthy to feel lonely, it's unhealthy if you get stuck in prolonged loneliness. And I think that's when it turns into something that can affect your health, can affect your mental health, your physical health. And I really do think we have an epidemic of it. And
I was thinking too, one of the things I've noticed for the last probably, 20 years, I don't know. I like to think of kind of our plight as humanity in regards to even, like you said, I like history and how it plays into it. And what's fascinating to think is that you go back and we moved from agricultural type of society that was more spread out because we needed land, we needed to grow our own crops to survive and all that, to then with the rise of modern technology, you get the whole movement of urbanization that happened with modernization and factories and the development of producing things. That whole movement that really started a couple hundred years ago, everybody came together and began to live in and around cities. Yeah. Cities have always been around. You go back thousands of years ago and you read about cities. Yeah. In biblical times, you go back thousands and thousands of years ago. So cities have always been a thing, but it seems like in the modern age, in the modern world, we even saw this urbanization happening, and people coming together. And then what have we noticed for probably the last 30 years? I know because I grew up around a city. Yeah. I grew up near Columbus. I grew up where we could walk to the mall. We could, walk everywhere. The houses on top of each other. To everybody, I remember, like even when I was growing up, it's like the goal was move out. Suburban life was out, but still kind of close, but out. And so what I've noticed in our culture for the last, say, 25 years is that there has been this exodus from, and not everybody, but kind of in general in cities, right? There's a moving further away from each other. Like the ideal dream is to have a piece of land where I don't see a neighbor. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then yet I also see centers like in our town, Easton, and places where people come back together, like busting in popularity. So we have this contradiction happening in society where everybody's moving further out. We've got garages. We've got, pull in, close garage doors, shut up in our homes, not really connected to neighbors. Right. And then at the same time, we also have this desire for people. Like we need that. And so I think modern technology has enabled us and maybe encouraged us to move to a lifestyle that is more isolated than maybe we were ever intended for.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and there's so many directions we could go with this, but I've been one of the books I've been finishing up is Mark Sayer's book, A Non-Anxious Presence, but he really does a deep societal deep dive on where we're at in trends, and one of the things he talks about is we are in these two extremes of codependence or hyper-independence.
Yeah.
And Western culture has a really unhealthy hyper-independence, and what's ironic is so many of us, especially, let's just be honest, us Americans were huge on our independence, and then yet ironically, in our interpersonal relationships, many times struggle with a dysfunctional sense of codependence. Isn't that ironic?
We struggle with addictions and codependency on everything that isn't healthy.
Instead of a healthy interdependence, the way God wired us. If you look at nature or humanity, I mean, even from the time of a mother and a baby to somebody taking care of you later in life to crops and God actually wired us to be healthily interdependent, not codependent or hyper independent. But I do wonder how that goes into loneliness. I was thinking about this because a lot of times we try to bring this down home, and we, as best we can, we relate to it. I started thinking about this. It's like I can't ever picture you being lonely.
Me being lonely? Why?
Yeah,
I don't feel lonely.
I don't feel like. Have you ever felt lonely? The fact that you're having to think about it.
Well, define. How are we defining? Like, have you ever felt lonely? Well, here's the thing. You got to understand too. My story situation. I've been married. Like, I went from living in my parents' house to being married. You know what I mean? And you've got somebody around you all the time. So I've not really had that kind of space or season where you're living by yourself or you're alone, like I know you have, and so I probably haven't had a whole lot of course. And I grew up in a family with a brother and a sister, and so
if I'm like psychoanalyzing your life from the outside, though, I feel like it's probably a combination of situational plus psychological. I think you've had a healthy sense of self, a healthy relationship with God, and emotional health, and you've been able to avoid a lot of trauma that a lot of people have gone through, and you combine that with, not that you haven't been through trauma, but you know what I mean. You combine that with, yes, you've been married for probably as long as you can remember, at least 60 years. And you combine that with where you. I say that because I think it's not just one or the other, because you've always heard this, the lie that you won't ever be lonely again if you get married, and then people get married and then they wake up and they can't understand how they're still lonely. So it's not just situational. Which kind of goes to, I think I told you, good.
Well, I was just
did you remember a time?
No, but
were you 13?
Sorry. I'm sure there was times, of, I think probably some of the small pockets where I have felt it the most. I really think that this, let me just say, I think this actually does play a lot into the health of not feeling a lot of loneliness in my life. And then I will give a caveat to it. I think one of the primary reasons why I have not felt lonely very much in my life is because I have always, since the time I was a baby, been immersed in deep community. Like I really think that people underestimate the value, the importance of being in a community where you're known and needed. It's one of the things I'm talking about this weekend. And my whole life growing up, and so there's the whole aspect of, people, well, why do I need to go to church? I don't need to go to church. I can believe in God on my own. I can do this. I think you might be overlooking something really important and powerful, which is to be in a community, and I always have. I've always been a part of a church in my entire life. I've never had a season of my life where I didn't go to church, where I wasn't part of any kind of community. And I actually think that has played a huge part in it, because there are people who are married but still lonely. But we've always had our friendships, our connections, because I'll tell you, my wife and I could have easily had a season like this. We got married and we were young. I was 20, she's 18. We're first moving out of our parents' houses into an apartment for the first time. And within 1 year, both sets of our parents leave the country, and they're living out of the country. When you're young and you don't have that familial connection to lean on, that you could have we could have a tendency to be lonely together. That we don't, you know what I mean? But do you know what changed, what made all the difference in the world was we were very connected at our church. We had small groups. We were involved in leadership. We did, you know what I mean? Like we were invested in relationships. And so I that can't replace parental relationships and the nearness of it, but it does make a huge difference. And we ended up really building bonds with a couple friends that we would just, they became like, they were older. I wonder, even to this day, my wife and I always have had, like, many of our really close friendships have been with people older than us. That have almost either been mentor or so, like even some of our good friends we're going to go on a trip with this summer. They're like 16 years older than us, and they're like friends, like it's the age isn't a thing, but we like just. We clung to people like that, and I wonder if it's because we didn't have parents in country. That we kind of just navigated ourselves. And so
it's funny. I was listening to, well, first off, it's what you just said is a really powerful insight and observation, and it's important. You know, I feel like we've not made this maybe comment in a while, but this podcast is not just meant for people who believe. It's meant for anybody that wants to be a part of a human conversation. And what's really interesting is I was listening to a podcast about a year ago from someone who is not a person of faith, but basically just said one of the best things that that Christianity has going for it is community. And they made the joke. They made the joke that atheists are terrible at community. But if you think about it, like one of the most church for all its flaws, and for whether even if you believe or not, the rhythm of regularly having a community to which you belong and to which you are part of a bigger story and purpose, and in which you have mutual encouragement and you're checking in on each other's lives and you're there for each other and supporting each other and you do life together, the mental health benefits of that alone, even if God wasn't real, even if the Spirit wasn't alive, even if there wasn't power or spiritual power, even if Jesus wasn't able to radically transform your life in every way, which I believe all that and more, the well-being that comes from being a part of a regular community. And there was another, you probably saw this, there's another article that came out, I think it was like 6 months ago, that talks about the people that statistically live the longest.
I did say this.
And the number one thing was people that didn't just have community, but were intricately interweaved in the community they were a part of. They knew the names of their baristas. They knew the names of the people at the bank and the coffee shop. And they were and anywhere in the world, you look at certain Asian communities that sit on the porch and talk and have community. They live the longest. They actually showed that this was more important to human longevity than even anything to do with alcohol or cigarettes, which is insane. But it just shows you the way we're wired as human beings and the physiological, spiritual, and emotional ramifications of our sense of disconnection or our sense of belonging and wholeness.
I will say too, when you asked me, like, is there a season or time in your life of like loneliness, the only time that my mind went to was when I was in high school and we moved. And, you know, it's when we moved to a new country, we moved to Germany, a new base, you know, I do remember, and this is why, it's funny because some of the things that I remember, I don't remember a ton from those years in school, but one of the things that I remember the most was a guy named Mike Walker. I'm still in touch with him today. He's the only one I'm in touch with from there. But early in my first few days of going to school there, when he said, when he basically befriended me, you know, and because not only were we living in a new place, in a new country, a new culture, not just German culture, but military culture, that was new to us, but we didn't have our church community anymore. Like all my friends were part of the church, went to church camp every year. Like even some of the stuff I look back and laugh, you know, we talk about all the old kind of church stories that are just like, some of you look back and go, oh my gosh, that was ridiculous. Or like, but I think that really filled a need, that filled a void in my life. You know what I mean? All my friends, my world was wrapped up in it. And so when I got pulled out of that, that was shock. And I think there were some seasons in my life, you know, very short, you know, but it was because of, that's what I remember. I remember Michael,
Right.
You want to sit with me at lunch?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You want and building a friendship and then feeling like I have somebody again.
Yeah. It's huge.
And it is so big. And so then I even think to myself, my wife and I were talking about this about a week ago. I don't remember the context, but we were talking about people who were just dealing with things and feeling alone, and we were talking about like moving to a new area. And I thought to myself, and this is why I think people come and they'll visit a church. I thought to myself, if I didn't have a church community, which my closest friends, I call them, they're family. Like I have family. None of my family live in state.
Same.
None of them. Same thing for you. None of my family live in state. None of your family. If something happens or happened to me or there was whatever, I'm picking up the phone and I'm probably calling you or Trey or, do you know what I mean? I'm like they become your family.
Yeah.
Because you spend so much time and you're so close to them. You know what I mean? And so we were just talking about people, and I'm like, how do people that aren't involved in church or a community like that, and they move to an area, I'm like, how do they make friends?
Yeah.
I mean, they do. I said
Right.
that's why people go out. That's why they want to, you want to meet people in your neighborhood. That's why you might join a gym. That you're trying to, but there's that awkward.
Yeah.
You don't know if you have anything in common. The one
Yeah.
beautiful thing about a church is that everybody is broken. Everybody is searching. Everybody has questions. Everybody may. And so
What about?
I think it's powerful.
What about based on, because I keep thinking about that definition that person gave. For them, loneliness is feeling unseen or not understood. So I'm curious for you, were there ever moments of loneliness in the sense that, they say that leadership can be lonely. In some of the deep moments of turmoil at the church in the past, have there ever been seasons when, because of the hat you're wearing, the seat you're sitting in, because of the turmoil going on, to where in that sense it felt lonely, the place you were in?
Yeah. I'd say early in ministry I felt that. I really did, because I wasn't very connected. Our church wasn't really connected. We weren't part of any kind of denomination. We weren't part of any. So it really felt like we were trying to do it on our own. And so early in that, I really did feel that. I think I'm thankful that in probably the last 6-7 years, I've gotten more, even more than that, going back probably, maybe 8 or 9 years. I don't know if it's been that long, but even building relationships with like Matt, we've had on here, Johnson, Keith, Conan. These are some local area pastors that we just began to build a friendship, and we like. Even Matt, we're close. We'll go out to eat once every few weeks. We'll go see a movie. We've gone on trips together with his wife and my wife, and we're doing one again as part of something connected to an organization we're connected to later this year, and so that has been like life-giving because there's certain things that you wear that other people don't wear, and so loneliness can visit us in all things. And I think that's a great point. It doesn't have to be that you don't have anybody around you that you just don't have anybody in proximity in your life, but it could be anybody who's watching this you could be the CEO of a small business you started. You could be the only employee. You could be the only, you know what I mean? And you can feel the weight of that.
I think about that famous quote where it says a friendship, there's another C.S. Lewis quote, friendship is born the moment you meet someone and you say, oh, you too? I thought it was only me.
Yeah.
And I say that because I think never to detract from the power and importance of human interaction. If you're lonely, start somewhere. But I think the more I've thought about it, the more that person's observation definition hit home for me, because I've had days where I'm just going through life and I've had 1,000 interactions. But to be honest, my best friend Logan, I feel like it's a David and Jonathan kind of friendship where we just we know everything about each other. And it's just one of those life-giving friendships. I can have 1,000 interactions, still feel lonely. Me and him can have a 10-minute conversation and it refills me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. And it sounds so weird to be vulnerable and admit that, but as a guy, it's interesting. I told you I listened to one of the most fascinating podcasts yesterday and this morning. I'm still listening to it. It's like a 2-hour podcast, but it's from the platform The Diary of a CEO. I can't remember the guy's name. He's a British entrepreneur kind of guy, but he had Simon Sinek on, who is, just a man's man, leader of leaders. He wrote a lot of New York Times best-selling books, Leaders Eat Last. He's the guy that was at kind of the forefront of that whole movement against for balance in digital media. huge. But anyways, and he's this, I mean, attractive young man, probably in his late 30s, early 40s, but he's single. And he really opened up about loneliness. And he talked about, he said he allows himself to feel it, but he just was very vulnerable on what he was experiencing. And he mentioned, you know, for him, he said, I know it sounds really weird. He said, but I have guys in my life. And he said, and honestly, a lot of them are people that have gone on to be 4-star generals in the military. Wow. He said, but our friendship, he said, we're emotionally vulnerable. He said it feels weird in modern Western world as you would be with someone of the opposite sex. And he had some really interesting things. Like, he really boiled down mental health. And I know we try to be so careful here because mental health is so wide-ranging and so holistic. And there are people literally born with chemical imbalances, and there are things that are completely out of their hands.
Right.
But as far as the rapid onset, rising epidemic of so much of our culture seeming to struggle with it in general, his argument is we have, by large part, our mental health situation boils down to we have lost the ability to develop meaningful relationships and to sustain meaningful relationships. And he just talks about the power of friendships. He talks about, I thought this was really interesting. He says he has a rule in his life, and it almost, the way he described it, it almost made me emotional, which you make fun of me. He said he has this rule in his life: no crying alone. And he said, I have one rule with my guy friends: no crying alone. He said the moment that grief or that loneliness or that bad day overwhelms you, he said, it's good to cry. Don't you dare do it alone. He said, you call me and I will hold space for you. He said, I won't try to fix it. He said, and most people have never developed the skills for how to hold space for their friends or how to actually train themselves to do the emotionally healthy thing and call someone. He said, but I will. He said, I will call my friend. And this is not some like, wow. I mean, this is
I wonder how you develop that skill.
I know. And I thought this was really challenging because I don't even know if he's a Christian perspective, but he actually said, this was even just going through this series, this was kind of a challenging thought. He said, honestly, we need to develop the skills for mental health, but not primarily for ourselves. He said, I actually think it's an indictment that we just want to go get resources so we can get better. He said, you should go develop the skills so that you can bring that back and actually be a good friend to your friends. He said, there are times I call friends who have not taken the time to develop the skills. He said, we should in schools teach the art of listening. He said, because when you're in the mud, he said, what you need for your mental health is the catharsis and companionship, not someone that feels like they need to clean it. He said just recently, he said, I was having a really tough day and I called someone and they started saying, well, hey, have you thought about this? He said, I just stopped him and I said, hey, no offense, that's not what I need right now. I'm going to get off the phone. And then he said, I'm
going to get off the phone.
And
I'm done with you.
And he said the people he knows, ironically, that know how to do this best are the people that have been in the military. And actually have been taught how to hold space and how to manage these moments. And they know how, when he calls, for him to say, hey, today sucked, for them to say, hey, this is what I've been through. And they know how to simply say, oh, that must have been really frustrating. Tell me more about that.
Really?
Oh, that must have been really frustrating. Do you
think that they did that in like officers training school?
I don't know.
Because I wouldn't imagine you teach every soldier how to do that, but maybe these are leaders. Maybe these are, you know what I mean? Maybe that's a skill they're teaching them.
And he went through, he said, now there's time where if you know the person, you can eventually say, and I'm probably bad at this. I've tried to get better at this, but I'm a fixer by nature. I mean, here's what you need to do. Here's when you need to do it. Hey, when are we going to do this? He said, but you've got to learn the art of holding space. And he said, if today I had a sucky workout at the gym, that's not something that needs to be fixed. You can't fix that. Mm-mm. He said, if you've had a bad day, sometimes that doesn't need to be fixed.
You just need to cry about it?
He said, no, but sometimes you need to hold space and you need to be able to just process it to get through it. And he said, he has people in his life that eventually they'll be like, hey, can I offer some pointers, or is it not time for that yet? And then when
interesting.
And then when they offer pointers, and here's what I thought was great, because when you want to have a friend like this, when the person, he said most of the time, most of us, this is the reality, most of us actually know more than we think we do on what we actually need to do. He said, and when the person, him or the person says, here's what I think I actually need to do. Can you imagine having a friend like this? He says, then the other friend will say, great, I'm with you. Let's go do it. I'll be with you. I'll help you do it.
Yeah.
I'll go with you.
Because the person actually knows probably what they need.
Yeah.
They just needed someone
But
to
to know
talk
that somebody's going to go with them to do it.
Sure. I think that's what you're talking about. It's interesting. It's something that I think that when I think about a lot of my, guy friend connections, like there probably is not, for the most part, that much, deep conversation and vulnerability to go, hey, you just need someone to cry with. Just call me up, and I'm not going to offer. I'm thinking, I'm thinking that also translates to marriage, because that's a really invaluable skill to use in your own marriage that I suck at. My wife comes and she's complaining about all those things, and the whole time she's talking, I'm going, well, you need to do this, and why don't you fix this, and you need to do this, and she'll even tell me at times, I don't need you to tell me what to do.
Right. I need you
Most
to listen.
of the time, she knows probably what to do. I think that's the thing. I just want to fix it.
Right.
And it's for good reason.
Yeah.
When you see somebody that you love, and they're stressed, or
Remember
they're
the nail in the
hurting,
head thing?
huh?
Remember the nail in the head commercial?
Which one was it?
you
The
never
guy,
seen
you got a nail in the head where the dude's going around with a nail in the head?
No.
The one where everybody's pointing out?
Whoever's listening, you need to Google this right now. Put nail in the head. So it's this. It shows it's. I don't know if it would be sexist nowadays, but it's this kind of funny. It came out like 6 years ago, but it shows a guy and a girl on a couch, obviously married or together, and the girl's like, "I just don't know what to do. There's this ache
in my head."
And then it pans out, and there's a nail coming out of her forehead.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, honey, I kind of think if you just..." She'll stop it. You always try to fix things. I don't need it fixed.
Yes.
And he's like, but I just really think.
Yes, that's. I think it's so true that we're probably not good. So I guess maybe what we're saying from his story in this is that we could help address the loneliness issue if we could learn how to really be able to sit with people and how to create space for people to, to be seen and not just to solve the problem. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he talked about, he said...
It's fascinating insight.
It really is. He said, here's when you know you're making progress. And he, again, probably from a non-Christian standpoint, he talked about this being one of the reasons for the power of meditation, which, again, is a very interesting countercultural thing, though. He said, because I've never heard this perspective, he said the power of meditation, this is part that almost sounds Christian, he said the power of meditation shouldn't be primarily for your benefit, but for the benefit of the people around you. He said because when you practice mindfulness, it helps you to be present. And there's nothing more healing in the people's lives around you than when you know how to be present. When you are sitting across from, he said, here's how you know you're making progress. When you're sitting across from somebody and you're not waiting to respond, and you're not thinking about tomorrow, but somebody, you get done listening to somebody, and they literally say, wow, thank you for listening. Like, I really felt like you were here and you were present. He said, that's when you know you're making progress.
I think one of the things that I've grown in probably the last several years, and this is what's interesting as I'm thinking about this, was processing kind of what you're saying and even what our role is, in ministry as pastors. Every single weekend, I get people who come to me and they just pour out their pain. Every weekend, especially in a series like this. When you get done, I got people coming to me left and right, telling me about what they're walking through, what they're living in. Can you pray with me about this? And they're just heavy, heavy, heavy things. Yeah. And that's kind of been the case. That's what ministry is. That's what being a church community is, I think, is having a place and a space where people feel comfortable and open enough to be able to share their brokenness and know they're not going to be judged, but they're going to be loved, and someone's going to see them, and someone might pray with them. And so, like, I think that's what our church really aims to do when we gather as a community on Sunday, especially in our gathering time. And I go back to, I think I'm a much better pastor now than I was 5 years ago. And I think a lot of it has to do with going through my own kind of personal brokenness and needing to, I can't stress enough, and I don't think people understand, and we'll probably say it every single week of this series, how valuable it is to talk to a counselor, to work on your own soul. Yeah. Because what it did for me was it helped me learn to process my own soul, learn the language of my own soul, learn those things. And when it did that, I became much more aware of the power of our emotions, how much they affect us. I became much more aware. Like when you go through pain, you immediately feel something much deeper and empathetic for those who do.
Yeah.
And until you do, you don't.
Right.
You don't feel it. And so I find myself far more likely now than I think I would have been. I always felt like my role, and you'll understand this, I think, as a pastor, it feels like everybody wants to come to you for advice. You get the feeling. Like I remember for years and years, that's what I would think pastoral ministry is. You know, I'm giving advice on the platform. They come meet you out in the lobby, the foyer, and they want advice, right? I'm struggling with this. I don't know. And you know what I've learned over time is that the platform might be one of the places that you give some advice, but that's not even the goal.
Right.
And in the gathering spaces, it's really not the goal.
Right.
It's the power of presence. It's the power of I just need someone to share this with, to be with me, and so I have learned that to try not to make my first reaction or response to be, well, have you tried this, or have you prayed about, I don't do that. It's not I don't know how to describe this. It's not a learned trait that I've learned recently. It is something that I just initially feel, and I never used to be in tune with that years ago. Yeah. That's the best way I can describe it. So that when people tell me their stories, it literally kind of breaks my heart.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like before, and maybe I got so numb over the years of doing ministry, and maybe I needed to go through some stuff and had to have some seasons away to deal with some stuff of my own. But my first reaction isn't, okay, how do I solve this? They're asking me for advice, but my first reaction is people look at me and they'll tell me the worst stuff, and all I can say is, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, I had that one couple, or not one couple, sorry, those one sisters that literally lost their parents in a fire a couple weeks ago, right before Easter. Literally, they were going to come to our church Easter, and their parents died that night, Saturday night. And I haven't come
yesterday.
and I have them coming up to me 2 weeks ago after we started the series. So thankful you're talking about this, blah, 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 and introduced us the first time I'd really met them. And they shared who they were. And they had these smiles on their faces. And as soon as they told me who I was like, I said, but they were so happy. Like, hi, I'm so-and-so. I don't know if I told you, we've been coming to church, and our parents are the ones that, I mean, they're like at this smile and chipper. And I just look at it and I go, I'm so sorry.
I know.
I am so sorry. I can't imagine what you feel. Like, you know what I mean? It was almost kind of interesting because they weren't, at least in that moment, at least a bit sad. And I'm like, I'm so sorry.
I've watched you, and it may sound weird, but I've watched you growing that too.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you experienced
But it's not
this.
a skill. I don't know how to describe it. For me, it hasn't been developing a skill. It's an awareness that just happened inside of me.
I think it's different for everybody. I think you can develop the skill of awareness.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But I also think it's in a pastoral role, I think it's a spiritual thing. The Spirit of God does in you. I also think if you're opening yourself more and more to this of humanity and the story of people's lives and pain, but you know what I also think, just as an observation, because it's something you and I have both talked about, and it's something you've been vulnerable that you've worked on. I've noticed in my life, my sense of openness to people's pain has to do with my pace. If I'm really, really busy and hectic, it's hard to, what is it, the old Japanese theologian said, God has a speed, love has a speed.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that when my soul is healthy and my pace is healthy, I feel even deeper for people, and I slow down even more for people, and more even in my free time. Am I thinking about how someone's doing or feeling? I have space in my soul. When my soul's really cluttered and frantic, it tends to be more inward.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot that goes into that.
Probably a lot of truth to that, because I think the more you are moving, you move so fast that you don't slow down enough to even have those cathartic type of moments with people.
Yeah.
And so I just, to say all that, to say what Simon Sinek's saying is, I mean, there's actually a profound amount of wisdom in what he's saying that I think is very unique, even in like I would say more so in a relationship between men, a friendship.
Yeah.
Then I feel like women are traditionally better
Yeah.
at this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They can just cry together. They can just do this, and it's completely natural and it's very healthy, and it's this. And I feel like it's harder for men to do that because
well, one of the things that I'm really glad that I have, I don't want to say matured, or that I feel like a lot of people coming up that were my age 7 to 10 years ago, there's just so much ambition. I want to be preaching at a conference. I'm really glad. There's so many things I still need to mature on, but I think I'm so glad I had maybe it's the kind of mentors I had around me, or maybe just growing older and God maturing me. But I really, not that I didn't always know this, but it really sunk in deeper and deeper over the last 10 years that life, as cliche as it sounds, really is way more about the who than the what. When I'm a big part of me moving to Atlanta had way more to do with, this is going to be a community that I can do life with. That's going to be healing. When I journaled, God, I'm not going to move from Atlanta until these things, and I was praying about where to come next. Yeah. I mean, a big part, obviously, I fell in love with the vision of where Crossroads at the time was going and the church. But a lot of it was like I got around, I'm like, okay, this would be the kind of community I could do life with. And I just feel like the older you get, at least if your priorities are in values of life or in any sort of healthy alignment, you just realize community and relationships really are everything. On your deathbed, you will not be thinking about anything else but the who. Yeah. That's all you'll be thinking about.
And I think loneliness is something that can affect us at any season, any stage of life. I think there's a propensity to be, here's what I would imagine. There's a propensity to be lonelier more in your early years and probably your late years.
Yep.
I think when you're in those years of school and formation, there's so many difficult transitions you make from class to class, year to year, different school that can just, and I know people that have had so much transition in their young life that it has drastically affected their personality. Yeah. I think there's something to stability. Even we say it all the time, that the verse in Psalm 92, those who are planted in the house of the Lord will produce fruit in due season. There's something about being a stable. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's one of the things I think is so challenging for those in the military. And we went out to lunch with some people, and I could identify a little bit, not that much, but with the other couple, the wife, she grew up in a military background, military childhood. And so I was like, so every 3 years you're moving? Because when I was overseas and living in Germany, a military base, you would have people who would be friends in the middle of the school year, then they would be moving. They're moving back to Texas. They're moving back to this, like middle of school year. It's such a strange thing because you PCS every 2 to 3 years, depending on, what branch and what the need is. And so, that kind of thing can really affect you. So I think the young years, there's so much transition, and it's so hard to find your, tribe. Yeah. I think that's why you see middle school students, they're struggling to find their identity because what they're really doing is they don't know who they are, so they're trying to find it in what connections they have in people and friendships. And then I think about people in later years. Yep. I think about, as I think about it right now, my heart really goes out to, and you don't think about those things when you're younger, but I think about even people in our community that their spouses died, that they've been with for 40 years or more, and now they're living alone.
Yeah, if you don't think loneliness affects mental or physical health, think about the idea that normally, even an older married couple, like you said, and one dies, the other one usually dies within the year.
Yeah. It happens a lot. And if not, I just think about that whole change. And so I think the older you get, the harder it is too. Yeah. And you got to think a lot of your friends are dying off. And so loneliness is,
by the way,
a huge deal.
Just another kind of side conversation we could go from there is the danger to society. Have you heard of Scott Galloway? He's a big voice right now.
I think I have heard of his name.
He's on a lot of podcasts, especially in the kind of the non-faith arena. But Simon Sinek was quoting him. He talks a lot about the danger of lonely men, and how if you look at terrorists and you look at across the world, he even went into it was really, really interesting. He even talked about Simon Sinek did when you look at in some Islamic extremist countries, and you look at men who are still living at home, don't have a purpose, don't have a job, don't have a community, aren't married, are sexually frustrated, and someone comes along and there's no outlet for any of it. And he just talks about, I mean, when you look at a lot of the mass homicides and you look at the shootings, what you will find is 99 times out of 100 somebody who is incredibly alone, incredibly isolated. And that does things to their mental health, and it brings a desperation and an anger and a violence to their soul that eventually comes out.
That's a powerful connection to make. I mean, it is interesting when you think about now going back to the Surgeon General's warning. This is an epidemic, and I think you have to think through it and talk through it like we are a little bit to realize the impact of this. This is so significant.
I'm curious. Somebody's listening. They're like, I'm struggling with loneliness. I know there's not a formula, but let's try to get maybe practical for a moment.
Well,
how do you realizing that loneliness is not? I mean, first off, to me, it's just comforting to know God, who loves us and made us and knows us, actually cares about this aspect of our lives. He cared enough that one of the very first things he did with Adam was say, "That's not good that you're alone." And so, if you feel lonely. In one way, in fact, this is really interesting. Simon Sinek, he kind of emphasized this point of if you stay stuck in loneliness for a prolonged period of time, that's not healthy. But the occasional feeling of loneliness, he said, is not a bad thing. It's a human thing. And he's actually found a way, instead of suppressing it, to be like, hey, like I can, in a weird way, almost appreciate this. This makes me feel alive. But instead of suppressing or ignoring it, that's when he'll call a friend and say, hey, I just want to. I need to like process this so I can move through this, but I'm feeling alone. And I'm really feeling just this sense of isolation and disconnection. And so I love the fact that God cares about that. And that God didn't wire us to be alone. So if you're feeling lonely, first off, that's just a sign of your humanity. And that's normal, but let's not stay stuck there. What are some action steps?
There's some that come to my mind, just some thoughts. I think, first and foremost, we need to recognize there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. You can do something about being alone. You can't always, I think, just snap your fingers and fix the feeling of loneliness. I think that takes time, but you will never be able to address loneliness until you address first being alone. So, the first thing I think of is you have to do the scary thing and the hard thing, which is to put yourself out there to create connection. And I will say, I think that is one of the things that we try so hard. There are a lot of different communities that you can find in this world. The whole idea is finding something you have in common with. What do you have unity around something in common? You build community and friendship. And so you can go to a gym, you can do that, you can whatever. But I will say, I think one thing that the church does, and I'm not going to say every church, but I know our church, we take very seriously, we go beyond, like we go to the extreme to do whatever we can to make someone who shows up for the very first time feel home, feel welcomed, feel loved and seen. That is at the very top of our priority. And so it may not be everywhere. Maybe you've had a bad experience. You've gone to a church and no one sees you, no one talks to you, no one does this. I would hope that would never happen if you come here. We hear all the time from people who say, I felt welcomed, I feel loved, I feel, just to throw the power of even the church community, because you're not going to find this in every community. So let me just say this. I don't think all communities are created equal. I'm just going to say that. You can find friends in probably every community, but not every community is created equal. And for example, those two sisters that I'm talking about, we know that came to me a couple weeks ago and kind of introduced themselves, and that just lost their parents, and their third sister, who was living in Texas, happened to be in town with them, and so I met all of them, and
the ones I told you about were at Mega Hunt.
That's one. And so in that conversation, I said, look, if there's anything that we can do for you, and they were like, oh no, the church already has. We've had numerous people reach out to us. There was a barrage of people that cared for them the moment found out the tragedy that they walked through. they did not have to walk through alone. And they went on and on, and they raved about it. And I'm not saying that just to say, look at us and look how great we are. I'm just saying that's the power of a community like this that I don't know that you're going to get with some friends at the gym.
Yeah. Yeah.
They might hear it, they might do it, but I don't know. They might, you know, and I've got friends at the gym, so I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying I don't think they're all created equal. So I would say the first thing you got to do is you got to address the aloneness.
Yeah.
And if you're living alone and you don't have any friends, I mean, you at least if you're in Central Ohio, come to X Church, because I promise you, you'll have some friends. That's the one thing that we'll do.
And by the way, you know, a little shameless plug if you live in Central Ohio, this Sunday is our small group launch.
Yeah, we're starting to talk about circles.
Yeah.
We always talk about, do you have a circle? Who's around you?
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of a circle. Who's in your circle? Who's around you? And so we can naturally, kind of unnatural, but in a natural way, we try to bridge that gap and help people find friendships and deep companionship. That is honestly one of the underlying things that we hope happens in this community.
Yeah.
We do. So I think it's one of them. I think too, you know, you have to fight back against the urge to isolate.
Yeah.
And I think when so it's like, which one? Loneliness affects your mental health. Poor mental health will also affect isolation and loneliness.
Yep.
It can lead you to it.
Yep.
I think about the story of Elijah, and the first thing that he does when he is depressed and when he is fearful is that he leaves his servant behind, goes a day's journey into the desert by himself. And it's that place when he's alone that he's saying, God, I don't want to live.
Yeah.
And
then his perspective gets skewed. Oh, there's
everything. No one
God,
else. I'm the only one, and it's not true.
No one else feels this way.
It's not true. But he just got caught up in that. And so I think that's one thing that you can do. I think you got to do other things too that are good for your physical health that can also affect your mental health.
Yeah.
So again, in the same way that we just got done reading the Surgeon General's warning that your emotional and mental health from loneliness and other things in a negative sense can impact your physical health, the same is true in reverse.
Yeah.
Doing things in your physical health can improve your emotional and mental health. So maybe going to a gym.
Yeah.
Maybe begin to work out. Maybe finding an environment where there's a club or there's something that you're interested in. Get on Facebook. Find a local club. You like riding bikes? There's all kinds of clubs around here that ride bikes, that go out for bike rides on Saturdays or run, or you know what I mean? Like it's not going to happen automatically.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing about communities. You have to take that step. But I tell you, if you immerse yourself into a community like the church, you'll end up with probably more friends than, at least that's the hope. You'll end up with people around you.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are some things that come to your mind? I mean, you've lived alone for a long time, so you probably have a little bit of perspective on this that's maybe a little different than mine.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. If you don't know my biography, I have never, in my 30s, never been married, never been engaged.
Well,
contrary to your opinion.
Yeah, I may have told somebody you were engaged like 3 times in the past. Apparently, I was wrong, but I could have swore you were.
Yeah, and the older I get, the more I'm realizing how weirdly small my family is. I have a very small family.
Yeah.
But we have a great family.
Yeah.
And I live out of state, about a 9-hour drive from my original hometown.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I don't feel like I have had a lifelong struggle with loneliness, in the sense that I've had a few. I mean, I've had a lot going for me, but a few in this area, several key things going for me. I think number one, if there's one thing that I could say I'm proud of over my life, probably more than anything else, more than career accomplishments or book or whatever else, it's that I have several lifelong healthy friendships of people that know me, the good and the bad and the ugly, and we would drop everything to be there for each other. I've had people tell me that I have a weird amount of not just friends but great
really?
friends, of people that would consider me a best friend, and I have people in multiple states that I do have a healthy amount of really deep, meaningful friendships. So that's been great. I think number two, even though I am extroverted in ways, I have an introverted analytical mind where I am rarely alone in my own mind. It's a good and bad thing. I can get in my head and I can spend days alone and thinking, pondering, reading, writing, and that can be unhealthy because I can take that to the extreme.
Yeah.
And like you, I've always been immersed in a strong community.
Yeah.
I've always been in the local church. I have always, and so I've had those going for me, and I have an incredible community here at work, and so some of those are I've made choices.
Yeah.
But that's not made me immune from loneliness.
Sure.
There's still certain parts. I mean, like there are. I love what C.S. Lewis says. He says, a joy is not complete until it's shared. And so, that longing for a wife is there. There are ways in which I think certain dynamics can only satisfy certain parts of your life to an extent. And that doesn't mean that you have to get married to, there's some, I believe community can exist in all kind of forms.
Yeah.
But I say that to say, especially over COVID, I think in the last, to be vulnerable in the last year, I've had seasons where either I've had some friendships that have shifted a little bit, either dynamics or just place in life, or there's some polarizing things over COVID.
Yeah.
And then in the last year, my best friend Logan, David, Jonathan, kind of a relationship. But he met a girl.
He met a girl.
That
ruins everything.
So,
girls.
It's funny, and I'm so excited for him. But, I have had to mentally adjust from that's my person. We talk on the phone every day till we catch up maybe once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so it sounds small and kind of whatever, but when you're not married and your community that's been an adjustment, and I'm not in a dating relationship. So say all that to say, getting like I have my moments and I have my seasons of loneliness, and I think I don't know that I always deal with it the best. I think again, I'm thankful I have some strong foundations in my faith, in community, and rhythms. And so I think for me, several things practically, I'd say if there's an antithesis to loneliness, I'd like to say instead of just being around people, I think the antithesis to loneliness is not being around people, because you can be around people and still be lonely. I think the antithesis to loneliness is connection.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be a holistic intentionality to develop your sense of connection in several ways. Number one, with God. Not to be all spiritual, but for me, a huge part of my sense of emotional wellness is, the Bible says spiritually, it kind of uses the language of orphans, but that when you're adopted in the family of God, there's actually a familial, this intimate spirit of adoption and of family and of fatherhood and friendship and brotherhood, that this rich life-giving intimacy with God where he'll never leave you or forsake you, he'll never leave you alone. And it's a deep, rich companionship. It's an hour by hour companionship. And when that's healthiest, there's almost never a sense of alone. And then on top of that, you mentioned the gym. I think part of it is you've got to not just, for me, it's not just connection to God, but it's connection to myself. Can I be, this is where I struggle the most because I'm restless. Can I be alone and content? Can I be alone and not look for an escape? Can I be alone without suffocating in loneliness? And part of this is the difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude can be healthy. Isolation is always unhealthy. This may be a little simplistic. I've said it before. I like to nuance it of solitude is getting away to be with God. Isolation is getting away to be with yourself. And I love the litmus test. I forget. I think it's probably Erwin that said it. You can tell if being alone is healthy for you by a simple test. When you're alone, are you getting better? And if you're not getting better when you're alone, then it's not healthy for you in that moment. And so for me, it's knowing myself. And I think we were talking about this the other day. Part of the tension of mental health is at times making yourself do what you don't feel like doing. So because it's easy, because I've been alone, so to speak, as far as, I've lived alone for a long time, it can be easy for me to not prioritize it on the weekends because I have such a healthy community here. So, a simple practical practice for me is I will prioritize it. At least sometime on Friday or Saturday, I'm going to be around people. This past weekend was great because, Thursday night I'm getting done with the gym, and I have a community at the gym, which is really helpful too. And I hadn't seen Tommy and Paige for a while. I'd been in Spain, and they're like, Russ, we need to catch up. We go to Roosters, we eat, And then the next day I do my normal Russ things, and I'm running errands, and I'm writing, and I'm reading. But then that night I'm officiating a wedding, and I'm sat at a table with a bunch of my close friends, and it was so life-giving.
That's fun.
And while we're there, we plan, hey, let's do brunch tomorrow morning. So we do brunch, and I could tell that I was full from that weekend. Another practical thing is, I think Pastor Zach mentioned this, that there's been articles coming out on another practical thing of combating loneliness is actually making phone calls. So instead of just texting, actually making phone calls. So I've told you, and I've said it on this podcast, I've fallen in love with walks. So one of the things that I do usually at least once a weekend is I'll be at Schiller Park and I'll just walk. And it's just so therapeutic to walk. But while I'm walking, at least half that time, I'll just start making calls. Yeah. I'll call my parents. I'll call a few friends. Think of somebody I haven't talked to in a while, an old friend. And I'm just walking. I'm walking. I'm around nature. I'm outside. Because that's the third connection is, I think this is going to sound very Buddhist of me, but connected to the outside world. Getting outside, getting into nature, getting into creation, getting in sunlight. I think that there's a sense of connection the way God wired us in the universe that is actually more important than we realize. And so I think 4 connections: connected to God, connected to yourself, connected to others, and connected to the world. And then a 5th thing, this almost seems like probably maybe counterintuitive, is if you're really lonely, a great way, if you're suffocating in loneliness and self-pity even, is to serve.
Oh, I thought you were going to say christianmingle.com.
No.
Okay.
No. But I actually, there is, because it does something when you take when you get yourself out of yourself and actually serve other people. That ironically it replenishes you. And there's that whole thing of you give what you want. Whatever you want to get, you give.
I was just going to say, it's, when you're talking about friendship, I think one of the things that is hardest for people who are alone and maybe lonely is that you crave something so much that you want somebody else to give you something that you aren't giving to other people.
Yes.
And so, the old adage, the best way to get a friend,
be a friend.
Be a friend.
Yeah.
And so that takes energy and work. But that's how you develop friendships. Is you got to be a friend. And then before that, you got to put yourself in a space where you can find a friend. So it all traces back to it takes a little courage. I think it takes a little courage. And I think that gets harder and harder the longer you isolate.
It does. And let's just be really frank about it. The longer you isolate, and in a culture that's already losing interpersonal skills, you begin to lose some of your social skills. And you could come across, if you're not careful, you could come across strange. You could come across needy. Because it's one thing to be aware that you need community. It's another thing to be codependent. It's another thing to be easily offended because people aren't meeting you where you're at. And let's just be honest, the church didn't care for my needs. No one.
You didn't do anything to help anybody else.
Right. Yes.
Or you can come across desperate.
Yes. Yes.
Which is also not attractive.
Right.
In any stretch. So
no.
Those are all good. I mean, I think these are all great. I think these are great, real practical things that people can do. But I think that to sum them all up, right, it's going to take courage, and it's going to probably take you getting out of your comfort zone because things that are bad for you can become very comfortable to you.
Yes. Yes.
Isolation can become your home. Don't let isolation become your home. No. They're very different than being alone and being isolated. That becoming your home. That becomes your safe space. Maybe you need to violate your safe space. I know people don't like to hear that a lot. Good. Well, because I understand with mental health and I understand the term safe space, and I understand that sometimes people need it, but I think we have to be careful that doesn't become a crutch, or a safe space becomes your escape, and that escape becomes your prison. Yep. And now you're stuck. And you can't figure out how to get out.
And you've lost the social muscles to get out.
They've atrophied.
So
good. So,
can I?
Yeah.
On a really kind of maybe lighter positive note, I want to read. It's a little bit longer. I may have read it before. My favorite quote by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
It's on his book, The Four Loves, on friendship. And I love this. C.S. Lewis said this: in a perfect friendship, this appreciative love, talking about friendship love, I think, is often so great and so firmly based that each member of the circle feels in his secret heart humbled before the rest. Sometimes he wonders what he is doing there among his betters. He is lucky beyond desert to be in such company, especially when the whole group is together, each bringing out all that is best, wisest, or funniest in all the others. And I love this. Those are the golden sessions. When 4 or 5 of us, after a hard day's walk, have come to our inn, when our slippers are on, our feet spread out toward the blaze, and our drinks are at our elbows, when the whole world and something beyond the world opens itself to our minds as we talk, and no one has any claim on or any responsibility for another, but all are free men and equals, as if we had first met an hour ago, while at the same time an affection mellowed by the years enfolds us. Life, natural life, has no better gift to give. Who could have deserved it? That's so good.
Yeah, it is. That's good.
We have got to rediscover this lost gift of deep, meaningful friendship.
Yeah.
And I think it could possibly be the cure to 1,000 ails, especially in this mental health journey we're in.
When you go see a movie?
When you go see a movie.
You see them all. Every time I see one, I'm like, man, I want to go see that movie. He's like, yeah, I saw that one already. I want to go see this one. Yeah, I saw that one too.
What are we doing tonight?
No, I don't know. That's a good question. Well, actually, I was supposed to go to a movie originally.
Yeah?
With Chance. We were supposed to go see The
Wrong
Covenant.
person. Oh.
You already saw it.
Oh, I'll see it again.
Oh, okay. I'll let you know if we do.
Yeah, let me know.
Seriously, I do. I don't know. Well, originally, Lorelei was going to, I don't know why we're even talking about this on here. She was going to maybe come to, I don't know. They were having to run through and some stuff for her. We're just forgot we have microphones and we're just now having a, what are you doing today? I don't know. What are you doing? So anyways, we can sign off. Hopefully this was a helpful conversation for people. And if they feel, I say if you feel lonely, come be part of a community. We'd love to connect with you, here at X Church and help you find, I think I think some people expect a church to solve that need when they think about it. We can't. What we do is we create an environment because there is a natural aspect to connection. Yeah. There's a chemical aspect. There's a natural, it has to be organic. And I think forced connections rarely turn into those lifelong beautiful friendships. But I think and this has been our approach for a long time, is that we just want to create an environment and go, hey, if you want to step into this, we got people who share this, who, they all have the same place in life, same demographic. And if we can put you into an environment where you can, then that's what we're here for. Yeah. So
you say I have a weird memory. Very first message I ever heard you preach when I flew here close to 5 years ago. You were preaching on community and you made a statement. You said, community can't be forced, but it can be found.
Yeah. That's a great statement. Whoever came up with that one is so good. So can't be forced, but it can be found.
Can be found. And so good. I love what you said. Stepping into a church, you may not automatically find community. You may. Yeah. We have plenty of people. I think I know we're biased, but I just think we have such a healthy, welcoming, energetic, alive community here. But it is up to the people that walk into the doors to take another step and to actually step into community, to actually befriend people, to actually plant themselves, to actually go to small groups and serve.
Join a team, join a circle, all those things.
You can't plant yourself. If you have the slightest amount of people skills, which can be developed, thank God, you can't plant yourself sacrificially, selflessly into a community and stay planted and devoted for years and not reap the benefits of community. Yeah. You just can't. Yeah. But if you float along the surface of here and there.
Well, popping in and out. Yeah. Being here 1 week and not again for 3 or 4, you're never going to see.
Or leaving the moment the service is over, but not actually getting involved. And
So good.
It's good. Thoughts. Well, God never meant for us to be alone. I love, it says in Psalms, God sets the lonely in families. Yeah. And that is one of the many beautiful dimensions of the local body, is that God sets the lonely in families. And so, to all of our podcast family, thank you as always for joining in the discussion. As always, write to podcast@thex.church. Rate and review if you haven't yet. Hit subscribe. We love you. Until next week, we'll see you then.